If my last video about data integrity left you with some questions, today's video is for you. I'm Bonnie Gauss, the head of communications for Skellig Automation, and today I'm going to take you through some questions and answers that the FDA has received about their initial data integrity guidance. A lot of these questions are also questions that our clients ask us all the time. So if you have questions about the process, hopefully this video can answer some of them for you or can at least guide you in the right direction. With our last video, we went through some of the basics of data integrity. The FDA suggested that manufacturers ask themselves a set of questions to see if they're abiding by data integrity principles. So let's go through those questions first. Ask yourself these about your process. Does your process have all the necessary controls in place to ensure that your data is actually complete? Are your activities documented at the time that you're performing them? Are all CGMP activities like initiating processes, changing set points, anything that involves changing the system, are they attributable to a specific person? Does your system have controls in place to make sure that no unauthorized people can make any changes? Do all changes to your system generate an electronic record? Are those records reviewed for accuracy, completeness, and compliance with CGMP, your SOPs, and any established standards? And finally, is your data securely maintained from generation through disposal after the prescribed record retention period as you have defined in your SOPs? If your answer to any of those questions was no, then you're not currently meeting data integrity requirements. We'll actually go into 21 CFR Part 11 in another video. Today, we're just going to go through a couple of frequently asked questions, but the first thing I'm going to define is a backup. Now, you may think, my computer already takes backups, I don't need to make anything special. Unfortunately, that isn't the case. The FDA defines a backup as a true copy of all of your original records, securely maintained throughout the entire data lifecycle and the retention period. Remember from our previous video that a true copy has already been thoroughly reviewed and signed off as a complete and exact copy of the original. For a backup to actually qualify as a backup, it has to be exact, complete, and secure from alteration or any loss. All metadata also has to be there, and the format still needs to be in the original or a format compatible with the original. It's also critical to note that the backups that your computer may create whenever it crashes or fails, those don't count as backups. It needs to be the result of a documented process. Another term that may feel like common sense, but is a little more complicated, is systems, as in computer or related systems in the regulations. The FDA defined them both. Systems aren't just your computer, they're people, they're machines, and their methods organized to accomplish a set of specific functions. Computer or related systems are your computer hardware and software, but it's also your peripherals, your networks, your cloud infrastructure, your personnel, and any associated documents like your SOPs. So I'm going to start off our questions with the most common question that I get. That question is, do we have to validate everything? There's a lot to validate. It's a great question, and I get it. It can feel like a huge burden, particularly to those who are new to the life sciences industry. I know that whenever I moved to life sciences, I was surprised at the difference between what I knew to be validation beforehand and what it is within this industry. Unfortunately, there's no real way around it. Every CGMP workflow needs to be validated for intended use. Now, we'll define what intended use means later. However, how extensive your validation needs to be, you need to do a risk assessment for that is probably one of the most common phrases that I say when helping companies. What if your system has non-CGMP as well? Do you have to validate that? Again, this is going to require a risk assessment. Your team should analyze the potential for the non-GMP functions to affect your CGMP operations. Then they need to mitigate that risk. So whenever you're doing that risk assessment, be realistic and not optimistic. Another common question is, when does a record become CGMP? It's simple, when it's generated to satisfy a CGMP requirement. The FDA expects processes to be designed so the data and electronic records can't be modified without a record of the change, and any manipulation needs to generate a permanent record. And now we're going to define intended use. All of your CGMP workflows need to be validated for intended use. That term is specific. You need to prove that your workflow functions as you have it documented. The FDA recommendation is that you implement controls that are appropriately designed around software, hardware, personnel, and documentation. Yes, I said personnel. So you need to make sure that everyone who has access to the system is trained and that they have a unique user ID. Some records that require strict control may include changes to CGMP records, input of lab data into computerized records, automated visual inspection records, and others that are laid out in the guidance. The FDA also strongly recommends that you restrict the ability to alter process parameters, data, and manufacturing and testing records to authorized personnel only. Another thing that I want to cover is the administrator of your system, not just your control system. Say, for example, you're running on Windows. then you need to make sure that your Windows administrator is a different person from your system administrator. And the reason that is it gives you another degree of separation so that the person who's your administrator won't be tempted to go in and make sure that they can change a record without there being a permanent record of it. It may seem silly, but it happens. The FDA has issued warning letters for it in the past. So you've implemented access controls for changing things. You have every user's access documented with what they're allowed to perform on the system. But what if you just want to look at it? Can you have a read-only system? And the answer is yes, you can. However, you want to make sure that what you're reading on the screen isn't what's being used for cGMP decisions. You'll have to actually go into the official records and use that to document your decisions. Another common question is, what if I have a cGMP record that isn't valid? Maybe it needs to be excluded from batch conformance determinations. What do? Can you just delete it? And the answer is no. You need to have a validated and documented and scientifically sound justification to exclude it. And even then, whenever you hand that data over to quality, it needs to contain the original result along with the investigation report that determines that the record is invalid. So you can't just delete it. You have to document why it's not valid. One more question and I'll wrap up today. So how often do your audit trails need to be reviewed? cGMP regulation specifies it for some cases. You should familiarize yourself with your process-specific regulations. So some cases require audit trail review after every significant manufacturing step, and others only require it before batch release. If you don't have a specified period in the regulations for your process, you must do another risk assessment and determine and document how often you need to review it. The FDA recommends that risk assessment includes an evaluation of data criticality, control mechanisms, and product quality impact. That's just a few of the questions that are covered in the FDA's Q&A. If you want to check out the link below, you can read the entire thing for yourself. And also, we may cover more of the questions in future videos, so be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.